Welcome to Is Franchising Right for You? With your host, Rick Morgin. Through each episode, we'll demystify preconceived notions about franchising, both entrepreneurs franchising and those buying a franchise. You can find this show on all the major platforms, including YouTube, LinkedIn, Apple Podcasts, and Spotify. Now here's the host of Is Franchising Right for You? Rick Morgin.
Good morning, Zach.
Good morning, Rick.
Hey, podcasting is new to me, but I figure if you want to grow, you got to change the paradigm. You got to try new things. My intent for this podcast series is to give the full range of franchising.
Okay.
So I've invited guests, franchisors, clients, franchisees, consultants, my peers, and financing legal over the next several weeks. And I wanted to do that through storytelling. You've got a great story. I admire what you and your business partner, Josh, have done prior to the development of horsepower brands. I admire horsepower brands. And I think it's an important story to tell, to let listeners know what you've built is possible if you have those ambitions. I'm sure when you started with Monster Tree and Redbox Plus and you had one franchise, you weren't going to stop there. You had bigger aspirations, which in a minute I'll let you unfold and tell. But I thought a good segue for you to tell your story would be to talk about how you point out the difference between first generation and second and third generation. Oh, by the way, I would say you're a third generation entrepreneur because a few days ago I saw a post where you honored your grandfather's birthday. So you're a third generation entrepreneur.
That's correct.
But you're implying some sort of difference, and maybe that explanation can be the great segue into how you got into franchising.
Yeah, it's actually so I'm on this call from a really unique place that's special to me. In 1969, my grandpa became the first entrepreneur in my family. He purchased a livestock auction barn for $1, and a livestock auction barn is where the community brings their livestock to sell and get auctioned off to the public. And he overheard the owner trying to basically offload it to a competing one down the road a few towns away, and he swooped in and leveraged the family farm, absorbed the debt, and he built it into a multi-million-dollar business in the 70s and 80s, and in a really small town. And so when I think about that, my grandpa's very frugal. I mean, doesn't throw away anything, reuses everything possible, and they had to do that to build that business. But my dad grew up in that business. My uncle grew up in that business. My uncle's son, my cousin, he grew up in that business. I also obviously grew up there. My cousin and I would actually get pulled out of school on Tuesdays to help with sales. And when I think about that, my dad now runs this business. My uncle owns his own livestock marketing company called Livestock Digital. My cousin owns the large animal vet practice in town. I have Horsepower, our e-commerce business, our cow-calf ranch. And that one decision to do that, he became the first entrepreneur. And down the line, and that's my first question that I ask candidates, because I want to know, because if they're a first generation entrepreneur, they have something missing that they've never experienced, and it's hard to communicate what that thing is. But the level of pride that you have, or the level of I'm not sure how to explain it, but growing up in a family business, you just have a different outlook on controlling your destiny and business ownership. And I spend a lot of my first interactions with clients trying to help them understand what that is as best I can. The people that are second or third, they already know. I mean, they already know that it's hard. They already know that there's, the rewards are better, are super important. But that's an important thing where if you've never owned your own business, you did not grow up in a family business, there is a level of an internal feeling that you get from doing so that I've personally experienced. And the only thing better than that is having children.
A great story. So through that experience of your grandfather and your uncles and your father, is that what led you to say, I'm going to be independent? I'm going to develop something that I'm proud of. And is that how you got into franchising?
It's my family never sat down with me and said, you need to be an entrepreneur and you need to own your own business. That conversation never happened. I think understanding that what they built and wanting to do something similar, I think was always a feeling that I had. But how I got into franchising is pretty unique. I started working as a part-time associate at a nutrition store, and the background on that nutrition store is the gentleman that owned the top grossing GNCs in the country broke off and started his own nutrition store line. And I was one of the first employees when it opened. I was part-time, and about 2 weeks into that journey, I can't remember I think one person quit and one person went to corporate, but there was nobody left to manage the store. And I said, well, how much does a manager make? And they said, well, around 80,000. I said, well, I'm the manager until you find a better one. And I remember I worked open to close a ton, kind of neglected my college classes for sure. And I was good at that. I built that location up into one of the best stores. They then begin to franchise, and the owner's nephew I was pretty close with was the first franchisee. And I said, this is what I should do. And I had saved up about $20,000. So I ended up going to the founder and somehow convinced him to co-sign an SBA loan, put in my $20,000, and then I moved to Florida to open up my first location. And it was great. I 1.3 million first year opened up another location and another, then acquired some. And within 3 years, I had 7 locations of my own stores in Florida on pace to, our goal was 8 million in revenue. And it's interesting in the weight loss industry, Rick, 2 things happen when people buy those products. It works and they don't buy it again, or it doesn't work and they for sure don't buy it again. It took us about 2 years to exhaust our new customer base. At the exact same time, Amazon came in and started e-commerce, bodybuilding.com, and we were behind the e-commerce game. And I ended up losing everything and filing bankruptcy. And the big learning lesson is don't personally guarantee every lease for 10 years. And that was my downfall. And I'll never forget rock bottom. And there was another franchisee who I was trying to figure out some stuff with, and they had 10 or 15 locations, and I wanted equity, but I wanted equity in future locations. And so I negotiated a $23,000 annual distribution for equity in future locations, and we grew that to 68 locations and over 40 million in revenue in 3 years. And so we did that for about a decade, and that's how I ended up leaving there. And at that time I was a manager of a concept that was beginning to franchise. I was an early adopter, a failed franchisee, multi-unit franchisee, rebuilt franchisee. And so I had a pretty good story and a lot of, you call it franchise wisdom. And I got into consulting and development. And the first brand that I worked with was Monster Tree Service, which my partner started. And that's kind of how we met, which, there's certain people that I just think that you're destined to work with. And that's us.
That's an incredible story about building something and having a competitor with technology come in and kind of just strip it away, but figuring out how to rebuild your equity, exit, meet the right person. With Monster Tree, that's home and property services. So it seems like you've kind of stuck with that industry as your playing field.
Well, Rick, you know us. We're not white collar executives. We're blue collar. We'd rather turn a wrench than be in front of a computer. We love equipment. Heck, we have a cow-calf ranch, for gosh sakes. And so I think that resonates with us where, we just have our brain around home services. We can wrap our heads around the sales process of making the customer feel a certain way, the services provided, how to differentiate ourselves, and how to leverage technology and process to just simply be a more attractive concept and offering.
Well, yeah, I mean, that says to me that you've got 2 mentalities: blue collar worker, blue collar mentality, but a very strategic brain, both you and Josh. In the way you've outlined how you're going to grow, who you want to grow with, who you want to acquire, and the industry you want to play in. Is there something you see about home services that makes it ripe for growth?
Oh,
Is it
100%. Yeah, 100%. So when you think about what type of business do you want to be in? I want to be in a space where there is a lot of consumer demand. And with consumer demand, typically comes a lot of competition. But if you can find competition that's fragmented, what better place for franchising to come in with better technology, superior branding, better systems and processes, being nationally backed yet locally owned? You can, I mean, none of our roofing concept doesn't put shingles on differently than other roofers, but we built up one of the largest roofing companies in North America because of our systems and processes that have been put in place to win jobs and create referrals. And what better place for franchising to come in and then in the space where there's a lot of demand, fragmented competition that doesn't have a good handle on technology and process.
and it indicates, yeah, you're right. The service of putting on a new roof is the same. Now you may have different or better roofing tiles, maybe not, but the ability to reach their customer base in a particular territory, I think that's what creates the difference. And it's that marketing machine, a sales machine, and the infrastructure that Horsepower has to support the franchisees. That's why I admire your company. Can you talk about what you've built, not just in the brands, but the support system that franchisees can take advantage of?
The interesting saying I heard the other day, Rick, was that there's a big difference in a person's there's a big difference in people when you think about people that need to win and people that hate to lose. People that hate to lose tend to do things to win that they shouldn't be doing. And people that need to win have to win the right way. And so for us, we're aggressive, growth minded, empire type thing, and we're aggressive. And every organization that both of my partner and I have ever been a part of has grown at an exponential pace. And through that experience, you start to realize that when you grow aggressively, there are systems or stopgaps you have to put in place to make sure you're doing that responsibly. And one of the things that in franchising that's interesting is that less than 5% of brands achieve 100 active locations. And there's a lot of brands that sell 100 but never get them open. And so for us, we wanted to grow aggressively across the country. We wanted to open more, have higher average unit volumes, have less failures. And to do that, you just can't have one good branch of the tree. So when our first brand, Mighty Dog, and we did in our previous brands, we experienced this. And you take a brand from one location to 100 and you do it in a short period of time, there's very few vendors that you'll partner with that can maintain that growth with you. And it's hard to go to a company that you don't have a relationship with and say, hey, you need to invest in your infrastructure prior to our growth to keep up. That's something that you're not really going to get a lot of buy-in on. So what we had to do is we either had to merge with, acquire, or start shared services that support our franchisees. And a perfect example is our call center. When we started, we were growing at such a pace where the call center was having a hard time keeping up, and they were being so reactionary, they couldn't put people ahead of the curve. So for us, we created the call center where when we sign a franchisee, we know that their average time to open, or for whichever brand, we know what that time period is. So we can start to staff before they open to get ahead of those issues. And so what we've created is an umbrella company that owns the brands. We do all of the development in-house, and we own most of the shared services that support the franchisees. And that's done one thing that we didn't really plan on, but it's given us a competitive advantage because it's created a triangular accountability where if the development team's not bringing in good candidates with the right expectations, the brand suffers, and then there's conflict that has to get resolved. If the brand's not doing the right things to support franchisees, validation suffers, which then negatively affects the development team or the sales arm, and then there's conflict that has to get resolved. If one of the shared services is falling behind and there's negative validation, there's conflict between the shared services and the development team. Or if the performance of the shared services isn't good, then there's conflict between the shared services and the brands that has to get resolved. That's something that we haven't seen in franchising to date. And that's something that makes our mission, which is the success of the franchisee, we have complete alignment across all three of those pillars.
So that triangular accountability, is that something you learned through your first couple of acquisitions and then say, okay, now when we develop this company, we're going to integrate all these support services?
No, I'll be honest, Rick, we had no desire to do any of those things. What happened was it was either, hey, we have to slow down how many locations that we open and award because the shared services can't keep up. And so it was either slow down or find a different solution. And that's where the first shared service, which is the marketing company, Franchise Rocket, came into play, where we acquired a company to invest dollars in infrastructure so that they could continue our growth trajectory. And then it happened again. So then we merged happened again. So we started one. And I think today we have 6 or 7 shared service entities that came out of necessity to be able to support our franchisees on our growth trajectory and to do it well. And that triangular accountability that's just kind of what the end product was, which, it makes us very unique.
Correct me if I'm wrong, but I'm going to go out on a limb and state something about what my understanding of horsepower brands is, that you've kind of done something that really nobody in franchising has done before. You're batting 1,000 in the brands that you own and taking them from basically 1 location, 1 to 3, and getting them to 100.
Yep.
So, and if I look at that means, well, once you include Redbox Plus and Monster Tree, you've probably approved well over 1,000 franchisees.
Yeah, we're well over 2,000.
Yeah, but if you were to chart the characteristics of those franchisees, because you're not going to approve everybody, there's a certain empire mentality that you're looking for. But if you were to chart that, you probably would have a predictability tool that is statistically significant in identifying who you want, who is going to be successful. Is there something that, and maybe you haven't, done that, and I'm not suggesting you do, but is there something that stands out about candidates that based on your history, that you want them?
Gosh, Rick, this is a topic that gets talked about a lot, and we've tried several. I don't know how many different personality test tools, and there's a couple ways to think about this. As of today, my partner and I, we have launched more franchise concepts from 1 location to 100 active locations than anyone in the history of the industry. So I would say our model of supporting franchisees is very well established. I don't like to say superior because there's some other really great brands out there, but we understand typically what we're going to be going up against and how to get ahead of those problems. So we overstaff and we have a lot of intellectual capital at the brand level. But the better you get at supporting franchisees, the more common your success will be across multiple different types of candidates. But when I think about, it's easier to talk about what I know doesn't work to start with. And so the one thing that we have clear agreements across our teams on is that when we're working with candidates through our development process, the ones that get to the end and can't take that and I always say you get to 80% of the information to make your decision. That's as far as you're ever going to get, and you're not going to have enough to make it feel good. The ones that can't get over that take a long time to make their decision, that have to, you kind of feel like you might have to convince them. Those are the ones that don't make good franchisees, and especially business owners. And it's because they have a tough time making tough decisions. And then when they make the wrong decision, they have an even tougher time fixing it and pivoting to a different decision. And they typically don't make, well, I would say it's almost 100% of the time, but they don't make good business owners. So that would be one thing that doesn't work. And, the one of the big things that we look for is that we do not want pessimistic people as business owners. We want optimistic, glasses half full, always a solution type of people, because those are people that go out there and find ways to win versus people that go out there and find ways not to lose. And that's a big difference.
So it's offensive minded versus defensive minded.
Absolutely. You know, and any business owner you're going to have grit. You're going to have thick skin. You're going to have to be able to handle some chaos here and there. And you're going to have to be comfortable getting uncomfortable. Like just how you said, as your business owner, Rick, you have not a lot of experience in podcasting, but here we are.
Yeah.
Roll the dice, right? And so I think a lot of people that get into business, they have a tough time going, well, I don't know if I can go do that. And I'm like, it's not a question if you can or not. The question is, why didn't you just go try it?
Exactly. Exactly. If you can't trust yourself, then move aside. But if you trust yourself, go do it.
My favorite quote is,
and you talked about failure early on in this podcast, and look at how you've overcome it because of your belief in yourself. That's what I try to convey to candidates too.
Well, my favorite quote is, good decisions come from experience, and experience comes from bad decisions. The more you can train yourself on looking for opportunities, the more opportunities you'll just happen to find. And I'm a big believer in, you have to have a good mindset. And if, my wife and I make dream boards every year, and it's crazy when we go back 3 or 4 years, the things that we put in those dream boards are the things that we actually have that are on those dream boards. And so, I think when I went through my, call it rock bottom, that was one of the best things that happened to me personally, because it set me on a different trajectory. But it was never about believing in myself or any of that. It was, I didn't want to go through life not having that feeling that I talked about in the beginning. Building something great is something that I've wanted to do, and building something that can help people get that feeling on the inside is, I don't know if I'll ever get, there will never be another project that I'll probably be involved in that will be as important to me as this, probably to date.
A couple more subjects before we wrap up, Zach. I know your time is precious, but I wanted to give you a chance to talk about the business that you and your wife, and I think you've mentioned before that this is your wife's the lead, Beutler Beef.
Yeah, we have a cow-calf operation, which is if I could do anything, Rick, I'd be a broke cowboy all day. That's what I'd like to be. But that doesn't feed the kids, unfortunately. And so we have a cow-calf operation where we deal in higher end genetics, and then we feed some cattle, and we have a beef e-commerce business where we do a lot of boxes of beef for gifts, high-end cuts, with really fancy packaging that are really designed when you open it, again, to give that experience of holy moly. And that's been a really fun venture. My wife is unbelievable, absolutely crushes it.
Is that something that she was involved in before you guys met and got married, or is this an offshoot of your family business who is still involved in the cattle industry?
It's not really a part of the previous family business, but I'll tell you, it's funny. So I've fed cattle as an investment for a while, where you can custom feed cattle, and there's a lot of corruption in the cattle industry. But my dad buys cattle for a living, so my dad bought me some feeder cattle, and my brother-in-law feeds them, and so I got good pricing on buying them. I got good pricing on feeding them. And that year, the packer who processes the cattle, they made more head per animal than they've ever made in the history of the industry. And I made $1 on like a $500,000 investment, $1. And I remember telling my wife, I was like cursing up a storm. I was like, I just can't. I was like, these this and these people that. And I was like, we're going direct. And I went on. We got a logo. I figured out how to get the labels, and my wife and I started doing it together because I didn't really have the time. And she took it over and grew it. I mean, we make more money on that business than we ever did feeding cattle. And she has done 100%, created the website, the process, right, as a storefront. And so now all I get to do is deal with the cow calf, and she gets to deal with the life, and she gets to deal with the death.
Well, I see your postings all the time, or your wife's postings all the time. So my intent today was to give listeners a deeper understanding of horsepower brands. And one of the two co-founders who built the company, I get the sense that your mission is not only to build an admirable, powerful company, but to help the country create entrepreneurs. And is that something you can talk about?
I think it goes back to that, and every Discovery Day I give this story, and I almost, it makes me kind of emotional every time. But the feeling that, a first generation entrepreneur, there's the feeling of owning your own business or being part of a family business or recognize what your family built, excuse me, is undescribable. And I still can't communicate it well, but they have something missing. And if you can give them a small taste of what that is, they'll never look back. You very rarely hear people that went and started a business for themselves, shut it down and went back to corporate. That is something you don't really hear that often. And so for the first generation, for the people that are listening that are, on their journey to becoming a first generation entrepreneur, I mean, hats off to you. What you're starting is so admirable. What your future generations will get to experience is an incredible feeling that I cannot describe in words. And so if we can give people just a small taste of what I feel, Josh grew up in a family business, there is something there that even if they did it and failed, lost money, that feeling is still important. Yeah.
Thank you. Thanks. Well, I wanted to, again, give our listeners a deeper understanding of horsepower, understand you and your feeling about entrepreneurship. It's an honor to have you as my guest. I hope you'll come back down, in early 2024. And I just want to thank you. I also want to get a little personal here. I want to thank Horsepower for supporting me and my wife's journey through her battle with cancer.
I know, Rick.
She lost that. And when I finally got home, this beautiful bouquet of flowers, I'll never forget that. Thank you.
You mean a lot to us, Rick, and we've known each other for a long time now, haven't we?
We have. We've known each other even before the creation of Horsepower. So, sorry, I talk about that and get a little emotional, and I just appreciate it. Thank you. Thank you again for being a guest. If there's any last words you want to take to convey to our audience, please take it before we.
Well, I could say, remember to eat beef and support your local beef farmer, but I think that's overused. So we could say, there's never a good time to start a business. Josh and I started Horsepower we literally started, I think, June of 2020, like during heart of COVID. People thought we were crazy, but there's never a good time to start. But I can tell you that it's going to be the hardest thing you ever done, but it will be one of the most, if not the most rewarding things you've ever done.
Thank you. You got to have patience. You got to start a business and stick with it. You can't have instant gratification. That's my learning in this. And again, Zach, I appreciate it. Thank you very much.
It's my pleasure. Thanks, Rick.
You've been tuning into Is Franchising Right for You? With your host, Rick Morgin. You can find more episodes on all the major platforms, including YouTube, LinkedIn, Apple Podcasts, and Spotify. Thank you for your positive reviews, comments, questions, and for sharing this show with others.